As you can see, in the last 7 days, I know it's hard to see it, I've made roughly $7,000. And that was all because I understood how to lock in. And we're on pace to do about $20,000 in cash collected this month for my online agency. And if you lock in, you can do the same, whether you're a college student, dropout, whatever the fuck you are. I'm a college student, I'm running a six-figure agency. Anyways, I'm gonna show you how to lock in this video psychologically and neurologically so you could achieve the things that you ultimately want to achieve in life. First, when it comes down to locking in, we have to understand locking in is not this gimmicky bullshit, get rich quick feeling that you think you're going to experience. You're going to take 2 Adderalls and you're going to drink a Red Bull, and then automatically you're going to lock in for hours and hours on end and have this endless motivation. In reality, locking in operates on a continuum and not a binary. So locking in is not this black and white thing. It happens over time, and it's a consistent and gradual process. So on the graph, on the y-axis, we have flow state and productivity. And then on the x-axis, we have time. And when you start out in the starting phase, you get a rush of excitement, you get a rush of dopamine, and then you go down to this phase here, which is where most people quit. Most people never stick out this bottom phase of locking in right here. This is neural dysfunction and resistance. And we'll get more into this later in the video, but your neurons are not wired yet. And also your unconscious traumas and your shadow are coming up as you're trying to do the work, and most people quit here. This is also known as the valley of despair. As over time you start to do the work and you actually stay locked in, as over time you develop neurologically and the neurons in your brain send signals that you actually want to start doing some fucking work instead of being a fucking idiot, retard, and fucking brain rotten and shit. You'll do what's called, your neurons and cells will experience a phenomenon called plasticity and long-term potentiation. Plasticity is a strengthening of those signals in your brain associated with work and dopamine and reward. Long-term potentiation is the strengthening of those signals, which allows them to eventually fire on autopilot over time. And then you reach this, obviously, phase up here, which is the ideal state where we all want to get to, which is locked in and flow state. So what you have to understand is locking in, it starts at 2 phases. Number 1, the starting phase, and then number 2, the locked in flow state phase. And it starts in the first moment in the starting phase, the moment you decide to do the inputs. So there's 2 moments. Number 1 is when you decide to do the inputs. And then the second time that locking in comes is when eventually over time, neurologically and psychologically, you adapt and you hit a flow state, and then you automatically start to lock in on autopilot. I'm going to draw some fucking neurons over here. So don't mind the rest of the graph. I'm going to draw some fucking neurons and shit, as you can see. Now, from a neurological level, why does it feel so hard? It's because your neuron signals are weak. If you're unfamiliar with what neurons are, it's how information travels through the nervous system, and it's how pretty much the cells in your brain communicate. And you have neurons associated with work, you have neurons associated with the impulsive behaviors, and fucking scrolling on TikTok right now. Right now, you haven't built up the neural connections associated with locking in. So every time you try and you go do some work, every time you try and you go study for a long time, build a business, take a sales call, create, literally do anything that's outside of your original scope of comfort, you're experiencing neural dissonance and neural dysfunction. And what neural dissonance and neural dysfunction are the neurons in your brain have not been accustomed to fire dopamine in respondence to doing work. So you're used to firing dopamine for instant pleasure, like instant rewards, TikTok, porn, like just a bunch of bullshit, shit food, whatever. Your neurons have not strengthened and adapted to sending these signals over time in response to work. So this is why you experience friction. This is why you experience a lack of motivation. And this is why you also experience high resistance. And most people mistake this phase of neural development in their brain and in the nervous system as burnout or as exhaustion, when in reality, this is just neural adaptation, and the neurons in your brain literally have to get accustomed to firing dopamine over time as you continue to do the work. Because as you continue to do the work, as you continue to do what's required to get the benefits that you want in your life, that's ultimately what will rewire those cells. Also, we have your nervous system as well. The nervous system is split into 2 branches, which you've probably heard of these before. The CNS, which is the brain and spinal cord. PNS is pretty much all the nerves and systems outside of that. Your peripheral nervous system, which is your PNS, is split into 2 groups, autonomic and somatic. You have the autonomic also split into 2 more groups, fight and flight, and then resting stage. Your autonomic nervous system in this stage is going to be much more active than what it normally is. And that's because you're going to be more in a fight or flight state as well. So on top of that, you're fighting neurology, and you're also fighting against your nervous system. Now, the beautiful thing about building these neural connections in your brain when you start locking in is you send dopamine, and you'll start to associate dopamine with the work. Now, there's also another neurotransmitter signal that gets sent around your neurons, which you need to know about, and that's called glutamate. And glutamate is responsible for increasing the activity between neurons. And that happens as neuron signals strengthen over time. So what that means is as you fire signals that are positive, that are associated with doing the work, you're going to fire more dopamine. And then your body is also going to fire more glutamate in response to that, which it's going to make this cycle happen on autopilot. So instead of then having to continuously force yourself to do the work and do the inputs each day, glutamate is automatically going to increase the other neurotransmitters firing, aka dopamine. You're going to associate more enjoyment with the work. So you're not lazy, you're just not neurologically trained yet, and this is what's going on neurologically. Let's dive into what this looks like psychologically and psychoanalytically now. All right, next thing we have to understand as well is, like I said, resistance and the psychoanalytic perspective. So you're not only neurologically fighting change when you're trying to lock in, you're also fighting resistance and you're fighting your shadow. So Freud, famous, renowned psychologist, you've probably heard his name before, came up with this concept in therapy called resistance, which is pretty much just the client looking for ways out and looking for ways to avoid kind of change and blocking the things that are going to challenge their identity. In the same exact way, this resistance that Freud spoke about manifests in your own actions when it comes down to doing the work. So you've probably seen this before. You have to study, but you have class before, and you also got to hit the gym. You'll find any way possible to avoid doing the work, to avoid doing the inputs, to avoid doing what's possible. That's fucking resistance. Do not listen to that resistance. And the more you power through this resistance, eventually you'll psychologically off yourself in that, not off the current version of yourself, but off that 1.0 version of yourself as you evolve into this 2.0 version of yourself. Psychologically, you'll crucify and suffocate this old version of yourself. And eventually, over time, as you go through that resistance, which resistance, the simplest way to put it, is anything that's going to stop you from doing the work and prevent you from changing. Eventually, over time, that voice in your head will silence. So resistance is not a sign that there's anything wrong with you. In reality, resistance is a sign that you're a normal individual. And my theory on resistance is that it comes from trauma, and it also comes from just a lack of other unmet needs in your childhood, but that's a conversation for another day. Next, we have Carl Jung, which Carl Jung talks about the shadow, and he also talks about the inner child. And your rejected inner child is fighting change. And as you do this work, and as you become the type of person, the type of man, the type of woman that can lock in on demand, that inner child in you, he's not fully accustomed to that yet. So there's certain parts of yourself that you have not addressed that are not accustomed to the work that you're about to do. And pretty much when you do the work, the shadow in the inner child is going to manifest also in abundance of ways, just like you've seen with resistance as well. And the best way that you could look at this is your psyche, your makeup as an individual as a whole. You could think of it like a board table. And the board table is made up of a bunch of different members. You have want, need, belonging, love, relationship, sex, whatever. You have all those individual people in your psyche at the board table. And when you start going through the process of changing yourself, you're going to challenge the ideas of the people at that board table in your psyche. So you're going to have some of those people kicking and screaming. And eventually, over time, they'll understand that this is the new normal and this is who you're becoming. But in this adaptation window, that's why this is so rough, because from a psychoanalytic perspective, you're adjusting, and from a neural perspective, you're experiencing neural dysfunction. And even me, to be normally, I'm getting resistance while doing this video. I have to film another one after this, and I'm tempted not to film it, and that's just resistance coming forward. But I'm going to do it anyway. I'm not a bitch. So we spoke at the beginning about this graph, and you're seeing it again now. So That is exactly how you hit the continuum of locked in. Like I said at the beginning, there's 2 stages of locking in: the moment you start doing the inputs and the moment you reach that flow state. When you go through the resistance, which is your own form of a trial by fire, and then also when you go through neural dysfunction as well, which is just your neurons rewiring and adapting to actually doing the fucking work and not being a brain rotter, you reach flow state and a stage of being locked in. And that's exactly when things click and your neurons are going to fire in your favor. You're going to fire dopamine in response to doing the work and the anticipation of getting to your desk to do the work, whatever it is that you're embarking on. But then also the resistance, the shadow, the inner child in yourself, and your psyche are also going to adapt, and you're going to psychologically kind of suffocate those, I guess you could say, lower forms of yourself. And this is where the identity shift clicks as well. You go from trying to lock in over time to just becoming someone who locks in on command. That becomes part of who you are. And flow state and being locked in are not something that are hyper forced or anything like that. You really can't force something. That's more so a natural effect. The effect of flow state comes from doing these inputs over time. So I'll run you through this one more time and we'll conclude the videos. There's a starting phase. You get the initial excitement. Yo, bro, we're going to go to the coffee shop and lock in on the work. And then after that, you or one of your boys, you face neural dysfunction and resistance. Your neurons are adapting and you face a lot of resistance from your unconscious part of yourself. Like I said, reference Freud and Jung. From there, you experience plasticity and long-term potentiation. Plasticity is those neural connections becoming stronger, and LTP is the effect of those neurons being able to fire on each other over time as well. LTP stands for long-term potentiation. Just think the connections between those neurons getting stronger when you see plasticity and long-term potentiation. Neuron to neuron, stronger connections, they fire on autopilot. Also remember, like we spoke about, glutamate. Glutamate increases the activity of neurons. You'll naturally have more glutamate activity as you fire the same neurons over time. Eventually, you reach a point of flow state and locked in. So it happens at 2 phases, the starting phase, and then also the flow state and locked in phase. And that is exactly how you fucking lock in. And yeah, like I said, I'm on pace to do $20,000 cash collected this month. I've made $7K in like the last week or some shit. And yeah, I live a great life. I love my life. I'm a college student. I love what I'm learning in school. I love learning about psychology, and I love running my business and making these videos as well for you guys here. And I locked in. I did it as a 22-year-old college student, built a 6-figure company. You know, we're going to do 20 grand this month. You could as well. So stay tuned for some more videos. Yeah, I'm about to make another one right now. And fucking subscribe. Let me know what kind of content you would want next as well. If you have any recommendations, ideas, or anything like that you want me to touch on and make videos on, just click below and comment.